And here we are, the last video of this training. Congratulations for reaching this point. And let's see what the last topic is about. Well, the last topic is going to be about incident response phases and communication during an incident. And when a security incident happens, that will be your moment to shine and to prove that you, as a security analyst, are worthy investment for your company. So a security incident will be your real-life final exam. So let's have a look at the phases of incident response so that you can pass that final exam. First phase, preparation. Well, this is where you start thinking about incidents. What if we had some security incident? What exactly should or are we supposed to do? In this stage, you have to make sure that you have an incident procedure defined. If you don't already have one, start defining one right now and then come back to this video. Okay, I'm kidding. So preparation is basically what you're doing right now. Hardening systems, setting up policies, setting up procedures. Don't forget to train and to test, right? Check how ready the people are, how well educated they are, how much awareness you have built within the company. Define a call escalation list, which dictates how to escalate if necessary from the first responder up. And if you have absolutely no idea where to start from, right here, this is an incident form, which you can freely use, reproduce, copy, adapt to your environment. Next comes identification or detection and analysis. This is where we determine if an incident happened and what exactly happened and how bad was it. This is where you get to define whether it's just an event or it's a security event. Bad behavior, for example, it might just be you're monitoring a crappy application which wasn't restarted in a month. It had a bad update. Perhaps some application ended up in an infinite loop and behaves erratically. Doesn't necessarily mean that's a security incident. So if the answer is yes and we have a security incident in our hands, you should try to do some triage or a severity classification. Now, some factors to consider here would be system process criticality. How critical are the assets affected by that security incident? Also, think about if data was affected. Did the incident affect the CIA of any of our systems or their data? Think about economic impact. Think about the sophistication of the security incident. Of course, this is going to be a very subjective evaluation, so you might want to get your lucky coin ready. But if there is proof that it might be sophisticated, then it might be more critical. Something like an APT group, for example. Well, after you identify the incident, we have to start thinking about containment. Containment is a very important exam tip here, by the way. When faced with an incident, always isolate, contain the damage as much as possible. Try to remember this for the exam as well. Now, this containment phase might be done using segmentation, something that you should be doing as part of your normal IT operations already, something you should be doing in real life. But you should also be doing during an incident response. Now, this segmentation includes, separating networks with VLANs, routers, perhaps firewall ACLs. And during incident response, hopefully you can rely on some solutions that automatically react, wouldn't that be nice, and put all the affected devices inside of some sort of a quarantine VLAN, for example. That's kind of a magic solution that, well, plays extremely well, especially for software-defined networks. Now, on the other hand, we have isolation. This is usually found only during incident response. It's about completely cutting off the systems from its networks. Now, this not only helps with stopping the spread of some network propagated threats like worms, but it can also cut the attacker off from your systems. So isolation can be done physically, from actually removing the network cable, pulling the plug, right? Or logically by disabling specific switch ports, for example, or blocking all the traffic using some sort of a firewall ACL. Next, we have eradication. Now, once the incident has been contained, we can think about removing the root cause, also called mitigation. Okay, so this is where you will probably run things like anti-malware, anti-rootkits, validate the integrity of the affected files and databases and file servers. Now, for some devices, especially storage devices like hard drives or SSDs, eradication might mean some sort of a secure erase. right? Now, this security race can sometimes require you to perform an operation called sanitization, which is performed with specialized disk utilities, and it's a method that writes zeros or random data over the entire surface of the disk. Now, some variations can write random patterns or even perform multiple passes to ensure that no data will be recoverable. SSDs, on the other hand, remember that are not so easily overwritten because they have built-in mechanisms and algorithms that distribute writes to less used areas of the disks in order to improve its lifespan, so that they are not going to be reusing the same cells over and over. So for SSDs, their vendors usually provide some specialized tools for sanitization. Also, if the storage devices contain highly sensitive information, or you suspect that malware has infected the firmware of the device itself, the storage device itself, such software methods might not be enough. So for these types of situations, you can consider physically destroying the device by shredding it if malware resides in the firmware, or you're simply not confident enough that a simple erase will suffice. Next up, we have recovery. Recovery means restoring the affected systems to their original level of functionality, their original capabilities. Now, this might require a restore, for example, from a backup, after a data loss, after a deletion, after a corruption, after a crypto malware, for example, a crypto locker, or it might require a clean install of some software, followed by a reconfiguration or reconstruction, or a re-image of a system of a compromised host. Again, this can be from a backup or from a template image. Now, always verify each operation in this process to ensure that no functionality has been left behind, because you're trying to rebuild something. Now, you should bring it back to the same state as it was before the incident, right? So don't forget some functionality along the way. Don't forget some elements of configuration, for example, or some applications along the way. Very important here. Part of the recovery itself is making sure that the incident doesn't happen again. So we're doing something not just to recover, but also to make sure that we are patching whatever caused the incident to happen in the first place. So this time, make sure you patch the vulnerabilities, you edit the, let's say, problematic, misconfigured applications might have been running in your systems. Perhaps even update the firewall rules or close some network ports if those were the cause of the incident. Now, actually, this is where you'll perform those security tasks that should have been done from the very beginning. Now, if a system cannot be patched, unfortunately, what you'll be doing up to that point is going to be those things that somebody can point a finger at you and say, well, you should have been doing this from the very beginning. Now, if a system cannot be patched, investigate why. Maybe it's no longer supported by the vendor, or it requires an upgrade on the underlying operating system. Now, in any case, don't just leave it unpatched and move on. Try to use some other kinds of mitigating controls, maybe some network segmentation, right, to minimize your exposure. Finally, we have the post-incident phase, or the lessons learned phase. After an incident, it would be a shame to go through all that without learning something, okay, for our future selves. So this is where an incident summary report, or a lessons learned report, or an after action report, sometimes called, will have to be written. It should answer at least some questions here, like what went right, what went wrong, what could have been better, who attacked us, was it someone on the inside, outside, or a combination of both? What kind of data systems were affected? Where did it happen? Did it attack our internal resources or publicly facing resources? When did it happen? If it happened outside working hours, it might help us identify it in the future quicker this time. How long took us to discover it? How long took us to mitigate it and to repair it and to bring it back to compliance? How was the incident actually conducted, or the attack actually conducted, right? What defense mechanisms were missing that made that attack possible? And generally, after each incident, try to sit down and discuss, why did this thing happen? Did we do something wrong? Or did we not pay enough attention to some systems? And at this phase, you might be tempted to start pointing fingers. And it's possible to decide that employees are at fault, right? They're not properly educated. They don't know how to properly secure their systems. So patch your users, okay? Train your users. Of course, you have to think about your chosen solutions or your chosen mitigation techniques. Is this the best solution for a problem, or is it just some temporary fix, the equivalent of a duct tape, or is it a solid security measure for the future? right? Is there something else better out there, and is it worth investing in? Now, hopefully after you answer so many questions after the incident, you will be able to properly update your incident response plan, make the necessary changes in the policies, train your personnel, perform any additional tasks like reviewing logs more often, performing patch management more strictly. Also here, from a legal standpoint, you might be required to perform some evidence retention. So if there's any kind of legal liability here, try to document as much as possible and try to preserve as much information as possible so that it can further be investigated. And after the clouds have cleared, with proper analysis, generate some new indicators of compromise. Integrate them into your current security solutions so that you won't be caught off guard next time. And finally, of course, take care of reporting, generating some reports. It's important for your job as a security analyst because this is how you explain to non-technical audiences like management why your job is needed, why your ideas and your findings are important, why do they matter for the well-being of the entire company, and try to address the reports according to their public, right? An executive summary might be enough for upper management, while a more detailed technical report would be appreciated by the IT manager. And a detailed procedure would be adequate for your IT, networking, and security staff, right? But think about your public, think about your audience. Or in other words, read the room. We also have a pretty important topic which might show up on the exam called the OODA Loop. Now, incident response phases look nice on paper, but they can look nice for a long period of time until they're actually needed. That is because when an incident actually happens, when you realize one dreadful day that you are being under attack right now, everything becomes much more intense, under pressure, stressful. So orienting yourself right in the middle of an incident or right after you realize that it's happening is something that the military-inspired OODA loop can help you with. Start with observe, right? Pay attention to the details of the incident. See what's happening, what is being affected, and any points of interest. Then orient yourself. Figure out where you are. What is your current state? Are we in the beginning of an attack, or has it already happened for some time already? Then decide. That's the toughest part. What can we do right now? What countermeasures can we implement to minimize damage, to keep the attack at bay? Or if it's too late to save anything, start thinking about what forensic evidence we could gather. Finally, act. Do something about the situation, right? Implement a technical control, disconnect something, isolate something, reconfigure something, right? The OODA loop is a loop because it requires constant reevaluation of your decisions. Even more, its purpose is to make you become proactive and not just reactive to whatever the attacker might be doing. Or even worse, help you avoid analysis paralysis, and in which you simply get a mental block and you have no idea what to do. There's an interesting document that I would like to share with you called the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. If I'm not mistaken, they're publishing this every year, and it covers a lot of interesting information here, and it also demonstrates the scale of the breaches that are happening all over the world. And just to give you a couple of ideas here mentioned in this report, about 40% of attackers launching a successful attack managed to exfiltrate data within minutes, the first minutes of the attack. 20% of breaches took days to discover. 40% of breaches took months to discover. Only 10% of breaches were discovered within an hour, right? But we're still talking about a matter of minutes before the data was exfiltrated, right? So yeah, assume that you won't be able to do everything by the book in a timely manner. But what you can and what you should prioritize is, first of all, human life, human safety. Preserve life and health. Don't forget this for your life and for the exam as well. Try to prevent the intrusion from continuing. Then try to identify if the intrusion you're looking at is the primary attack or just a decoy for something else happening at the same time. Avoid alerting the attacker. If you catch him or her in the act, don't let them know what you're doing. Don't let them figure out that you've caught on to them. Right? And try to preserve as much evidence as needed, just in case. So this should be your list of priorities whenever you need to react under pressure during a security incident. And real-life incident responders might be part of a computer security incident response team, right? This team might work in a dedicated SOC, that's a Security Operations Center, or they might just be some cherry-picked staff members. In any case, it's very important to have a well-defined team to know exactly who is responsible for what, and also to be able to define a single point of contact or a single team of contact with the partners, the clients, the media, even law enforcement. So talking about the communication plan, right? Of course, you will need to have a team of people that are supposed to work together, so communication is going to be essential. Now, depending on the level of the intrusion itself, of the security incident, you might choose not to trust, for example, your internal communication channels, like your internal voice over IP network or internal email or instant messaging. So try to be creative and think about out-of-band communication channels that cannot be intercepted or at least cannot be affected by the current breach, just in case they are now being intercepted or maliciously altered. Use the incident response team as a single point of contact for all the incident-related communication, right? And even within this team, within those team members, treat information on a need-to-know basis. Perhaps not all members of the team need to be informed about all the incident details. Remember, a security incident might expose very sensitive information, but there's no reason to keep spreading that information to everybody simply because such an incident happened. You also don't want information to start leaking to the press before you can prepare an official message, just because some individuals happen to know too much. Even more, keep in mind that your adversaries or attackers might be insiders, or people who are already in contact with you. You don't want to give them too much information about what you're currently doing to mitigate the attack. Now, depending on an incident, you might also need to think about notifying outside parties as well, especially if a data breach has occurred and the data, well, it's not entirely your own. Some examples of breaches when third parties need to be notified are data theft, right? Exfiltration, probably the most common type of breach. Remember that sometimes you will not be able to immediately determine if data exfiltration has happened or not. You don't know if a file has been copied or not, right? You might be required to notify involved parties even if you just suspect that data theft has occurred. Also, in case of insider data exfiltration conducted by your own employees. In case of device theft, or device loss, especially if those devices hold confidential information. In case of accidental data breaches, if they can happen due to misconfigurations like displaying confidential data, for example, to unauthorized users. In case integrity and availability were affected during a breach, which can result in the actual destruction of the data or of the system and or of the facility that is hosting that data. So depending on the type and the breadth of the information disclosed, you may need to notify the public through media, law enforcement, business partners, even direct clients. Each country has its own regulations regarding information theft. So for example, under GDPR in Europe, you are required to notify the affected parties in no more than 72 hours since the discovery of the breach. And coordinating response to an incident might require as well other departments. So we might have to expect other departments to communicate with the incident response team, including but not limited to senior leadership, because they have to know how the incident affects the business in order to make further decisions. Then we should address the legal department for legal exposure, compliance breaches perhaps, or reporting even criminal activity to law enforcement if necessary, or dealing with sensitive information exposure. The IT or the networking department, since they maintain the infrastructure affected by the incident, and they're the first ones that can actually provide valuable insight into what actually happened. That's where the information is going to be coming from. Think about HR, human resources, for people involved in the incident, especially if personally identifiable information, PII, was involved in the breach. Also because there might be contracts or SLAs that have been breached. HR is also expected to inform the rest of the employees about the incident and how it affects them. After the incident, it's still going to be HR's job to ensure that training programs are conducted so that the risk of a similar incident in the future can be, well, at least minimized. Also, some guilty people might need to be punished. sorry, disciplines, fired, warned, eliminated from the Secret Santa group this year. So HR should handle this as well. Even marketing or PR should be involved as the incident affected clients and partners. And you want to be in control when you share the great news with them. Wow. Some regulations actually make this communication to the public mandatory. So you should expect that most security incidents will come with bad publicity anyway. So if you cannot avoid it, at least, keep it under control. And as most security incidents address data, let's see a couple of the relevant types of data that might be included or involved in a security incident. Starting with PII, right? Personally identifiable information. That's data that can be used to identify a person. This includes things like the full name, the date of birth, the address, the social security number, or any other national identifier, biometric data perhaps, even data that might be linked to a person like an IP address or a GPS location. That also can be considered part of PII. Now, depending on where you live, different legislation applies. And different legislation handles PII, but usually it's not free for all anywhere in the world. We also have sensitive personal information. This doesn't identify necessarily a person, but it's information linked to a person. It can bring prejudice of opinion, for example, a person's religious orientation, political orientation, its ethnicity, sexual orientation, personal life, relationships, genetic data, and so on. Things that you usually don't want the public to know. Personal health information or protected health information is any information that refers to medical records, lab test results, medical insurance, and so on. HIPAA defines how to properly handle and store medical information. Financial information is about, bank accounts, investment accounts, how much money you have, your credit card information, how much bad debt you have, or even tax forms. The PCI DSS defines how to safely handle this type of data when it comes to credit card payments operated by a commercial entity, like an online store. Intellectual property is any type of information that is created by a company, usually in relation to something that the company produces and sells. This also covers copyrights, patents, and trademarks. So IP must be protected to maintain market or financial advantages, but in some cases it should also be protected for national security reasons. Corporate information might not be exactly protected like IP, but might still represent sensitive information like business plans, list of customers, product development plans, financial operations, contracts, salaries in your company, and so on. Now, this type of information must be protected against public disclosure and also from reaching competitors' eyes, right? Financial information and future plans must be protected as they can be used to influence stock prices as well. Now, internal procedures inside of a company might represent useful information to an attacker as well, especially one that intends to use social engineering techniques. So protect those as well. And finally, we have high-value assets. This is critical information systems. Critical means that if either the C, the I, or the A are affected or completely compromised, the business is going to face a dangerously high risk or even going out of business. So HVA must be prioritized during incident response and in general considered anytime something within the company needs to be prioritized. Have a look over this link to understand exactly what those high value assets are and how to secure them. Finally, this kind of makes a lot of sense, but let me just put this here. If you have an incident response plan well documented, don't forget to train your people, right? Train the people involved, or even conduct security training for all your employees, regardless if they're part of the IR team or not. Properly trained users can avoid a lot of the threats out there, and not just technical training, but also train them against social engineering, phishing attacks, train them to properly use the security measures at their disposal. And secondly, test your incident response plan. Testing can range from easy and cheap to difficult and expensive, and can include things such as tabletop exercises where the incident response team pretends to have a security incident and runs through the stages just to check that everyone knows what to do. It's kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons or a board game, right? You really have to put some effort into it to make it useful. Now, another type of test is penetration testing. We talked about this as well, where an actual team called the Red Team dresses up like hackers with glasses and hoodies. No, kidding, they just act like hackers and attempt to, well, penetrate your systems, your network. On the other side, a blue team attempts to fight them, keep them out of your network. And there are many variations to this. For example, having a white team made up of people who observe the exercise, or the red team acting without the knowledge of the blue one, taking them by surprise, right? Or having various level of knowledge before attacking, such as we can have a black box penetration test where the attacker has no knowledge at all. The red team must go through all the stages of an attack. A gray box approach, this one is performed with partial knowledge, kind of similar to what a non-technical insider employee would know, or a white box approach where the red team knows everything about the system they're trying to attack, to exploit, and all the security measures in place, kind of like similar to the knowledge an internal technical person would have. And don't forget about rules of engagement. For any penetration testing exercise, remember that you are actually attempting to break some defenses, and in the course of doing so, you might crash some systems. You might cause some downtime, you might involve some unaware employees, or gain access to some sensitive information which might get exposed. So it's crucial to have a clear understanding of what is and what is not allowed during such an exercise. Now, these agreements are called, after the military term, rules of engagement. And this document right here is an example of best practice guide for pen testing, and can be found in NIST's publication 800-115. Well, this time I'm gonna thank you for watching, but I'm not going to bore you again with all the topics that we just covered. What I'm going to do is thank you so much for watching, because this is the end of the CySA Plus training. If you reached this point, congratulations, and I really hope you found this content useful and it was a good investment of your time spent on YouTube. I'd like to thank you so much for liking, for subscribing to this channel, for encouraging me to create more content such as this. So see you next time on the next certification. Bye bye.